I'm a computer scientist primarily, so naturally I would be sort of empiricist in the absolute in some sense. But really what I've been trying to solve in many ways recently is there a way that there exists a problem-solving structure that can solve problems that currently remain unsolved today by any means, by people trying to solve those problems, by millions of computers trying to solve those problems. Is there some symbiotic way that people together with computers can become solving the magnitude of those problems in new pathways that are currently yet undiscovered? And so when you start thinking about that, so obviously you want to get the best of all possible worlds, the best of what people are doing, the best of what computers are able to do in this really tightly integrated structure that in many ways needs to co-evolve together. So I look at a lot of these things about, because if you think about it, what you want to do is you want people to really start thinking about this problem and become the best problem solvers for that specific problem over the space of that exposure to it. And so for that doesn't happen overnight. So obviously they would have to evolve over it over a long period of time. And at the same time, the computers, of course, initially would be completely only instrumented by the computer programs that somebody writes on them. But over time, as they interact with people, they can figure out what are the best ways in which they can provide tools to people to actually end up being solving the problems in brand new ways. And perhaps the key instrument that enables people to stick around for that long enough period of time to become expert from practically novice on some particular domain is they need to be engaged over a long period of time. So a lot of things that we're doing is studying the engagement structure that would allow people to stick around for 3 months, 6 months, completely voluntarily, become experts on a particular problem, and then solve it. And I guess I can stand here today and tell you that we actually have evidence that that is possible. The Folded project that was mentioned is a problem to discover new protein structures that are used for finding new drugs, etc. I can tell you that there people who knew nothing about biochemistry prior to entering this sort of social game world are now published 3 papers in Nature, the most respected scientific journal in the world, as well as Proceedings of Natural Academies of Science. And one of them, for example, included a protein that's related to the HIV virus on monkeys that scientists didn't know the shape of for 15 years. They were able to solve it in 10 days. So after, of course, getting to the point of being able to address those kinds of problems. And of course, and that's where the press and everybody else sort of started rallying around, and now the foundations are trying to pump money into sort of trying to figure out these new ways of doing creative things like that. But that's basically some of the background and the kinds of things that I'm thinking about. And the new things that I'm thinking about is what is possible and what's still completely untapped in many ways.
Thank you. Well, my background, I think, is a little bit different, and my approach to how I think about solving problems or approaching problems is a little more ongoing in terms of my own practice. I've had a design brand development firm here in the Northwest for about almost 40 years. I was telling Zoran earlier that most of the people who work with me haven't been alive as long as I've been designing, which is a terrifying proposition. But I think that how I tend to, my approach to innovation, or the work that I have been involved with on an innovation front or a problem-solving front, really is looking at holes or openings, and how can I look at an opening or an opportunity and look for a way to create a movement into that opening. So in the past, I've worked with Procter and Gamble and Johnson & Johnson and IBM and other groups on looking at openings in the market or areas that are a story or a product or an offering has not been placed, and how can we work together as a team or as a collective to place something in that position? Because this is a lot of where I live, is in product development and innovation. And I think that there's a little bit of a corollary between what Zoran was talking about and how we tend to think, which is that word solution. The word solving and solution is a way of thinking about flow, and how do you engage with a team of people, or how do you engage with a small group of people and create a flowing proposition that can answer questions. And our method is really about questioning. We have a thing that we do, a workshop or a session that can go from a couple of hours to a half day to a full day to 3 days to 6 days to a week, whatever, that's really about looking for ways to gather people around a problem and then to listen to each other and listen to what the evolution of that could be. So in a manner, there is an alignment between some of the things that Zoran is exploring and what we do, although we're much more intuitive, which is kind of where I live. I'm not a scientist. I don't come from that world, and I tend not to worry about measurement at all. I worry more about the sort of lightning character of the idea, and is it appropriate, and is it something that can fit into an opportunity for somebody that we're working with over time? Does it answer a question? And is there a way, is the dance between us constructive and interesting and energizing? So it's a little more of a looser kind of fabric that I tend to play in when I look at these things, because the work that we do is really much more about brand or place or idea or story or message. How can you work together, sort through a set of inspirations, and then define them, bring them to a channel so that they can be usefully applied?
So I guess I can then follow up with a question, because I just enumerated maybe 4 or 5 questions. So let me just pick one. So I mean, when you talk about brand or a lot of these designs, every design has an objective, right? And a lot of times those objectives are, sometimes loosely defined, but a lot of them actually fairly well defined. I mean, if you want a brand, you want to enumerate the overall generic appeal that a brand would produce in some measurable way. Mm-hmm. So as you go through sort of this kind of design process and sort of or exploration of the space of ideas, and maybe pick one as the one to sort of delve in further, how do you actually know that that itself is going to be the process that leads to perhaps one of the best solutions to the brand? Because I can see how you can produce a solution, or perhaps even a compelling solution, but how do you know that you've done the best possible thing, or close to the best possible thing?
Well, I think there's 2 answers to that question. One of them is that oftentimes the work that we're involved with is emotional. So it becomes harder to look for what is the best solution for an emotional condition. And what I mean by that is, let's say one idea that we're looking at is a new way of cleaning your teeth, for example, and thinking about a technology that potentially would come from the University of Washington that then is sort of repositioned and organized in a way that it addresses some need. The key is that what it wraps to is an emotional need, not necessarily a need that can be defined in another sort of quantifiable way. And so what I find is that oftentimes the bridge between the opening question and arriving at the solution is the response is perhaps twofold. One is, based on my experience, my intuition tells me that this is going to be the best path for us to go, my instinct. The other path is you develop a product or an idea to a certain point, then you begin to test it against your audience, against your customer, to see what's the reaction. What do people, you search in, you research to see what is the viability of that, because the insights that you gather can be very fast in a way, and whether you ever get to the best solution or not would be kind of an ongoing degree of, as you say, engagement. So how, when I engage with a problem, how hard do I grab it? How hard do I hold onto that? How willing am I to engage with that? And that's one of the challenges that we really look at is if there's a story and someone is willing to hold that story and take it with them, then that's going to be part of that engagement.
But do you really believe that sort of to me, emotional stuff is also quantifiable. Mm-hmm. And that's why you do the pilot studies and all this stuff, because you're actually quantifying those things. Mm-hmm. Exactly, right? And actually through doing a lot of these things telemetrically, meaning just sort of allowing many people to see it on the web and sort of measuring certain things, you can actually almost start devise sort of common tendencies, principles, and stuff. The other aspect of this is that if you measure the emotional impact on the first impulse, it's very different from the actual persistent perception that people will have with a product. Mm-hmm. So, we see that when you can make a game or an interactive concept that somebody would want to go play right away, but that might be a very different thing than something that somebody would want to stick around for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And it's in the same way here. I might feel good about that toothbrush, because it kind of feels good in my hand, right? But I may forget about it 3 days later. Mm-hmm. And if you're optimizing, and maybe you're architects probably, right? So when people see it in the designs or maybe walking into the first, they have a particular feeling about it. Once they live in it for a year or two, I bet you the feeling is very different. And I bet you that's true. And I bet you nobody actually optimizes for that, which seems to be probably the right thing. And the same thing here, right? So if you want to have people buy the most of those toothbrushes, maybe it's how it feels initially, but maybe it's how actually they review it three months later when they still use it, and and that's why. So there's both. I guess I'm thinking, I'm come from the place where probably nothing is unmeasurable in some way, not necessarily directly, and I'm not going to put electrodes in your brain and say your emotion is 3.5, right? But I can measure your emotion based on residual actions, namely what exactly you did afterwards. And a lot of times you actually don't optimize for emotion, you optimize for the impulse buy that's caused by the emotion. So actually a lot of times there's something even more measurable in the end and actually probably all corporations probably they're looking for some measurable purchase power of the brand that you're building.
I think that the idea of quantifying or defining the emotionality of an object or a transaction or a long-term relationship with something, a place or a product or a story or a message or whatever it may be, I think you're right. I think that is definitely out there. And the persistence of examination that you reference is something that I think is oftentimes overlooked. I think people, just like your gesture to the architects here, people come into a place, they have an opening experience. Is that experience repeatable? I mean, do they consistently come back and go, oh my God, this place is incredible, or it sucks, or whatever? And how do you sort of continue to examine, or how do you stay in touch with people to kind of watch what's going on from that standpoint? And then I think the same issue happens in terms of your relationship with, let's say, Apple. You know, you have a product.
Or the company?
I'm talking about the company.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, we could talk about the fruit also. I think that, you know, you could probably, there could be some persistent memories and emotional characters that are tied to eating an apple, holding an apple, looking at it, waiting for it to be perfect. I do that all the time.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. I just wasn't sure.
That's okay. I appreciate the question. But I do think that the layering of what is the opening connection, what is the way in which I understand at that point, and then months out, what happens. Just like I got this really cool game and it looked so great, and then I started playing it and I realized it totally sucked. But on the other hand, is there a way that I can understand the character of how it's designed so it could be better over time, and my experience could be improved over time? Because that engagement is another degree of connection that's interesting. But to flip the question back to you, what I'm curious about is in that idea of building a community around solving a problem, whether it's a hardware community or a group of minds or eyes or listeners or people looking at how to digest and engage and evolve to creating an answer. How do you keep them as a team engaged and connected to that process?
Well, I mean, you know, that we've been studying this for 4 years, so it's actually fairly. I wouldn't actually say that we've uncovered sort of the fundamental principles that govern this thing, but I will. Actually, the more I look at this, the more I realize how much better and how much untapped potential there is in human plasticity of their mind and what they're capable of doing, and how much the educational process, the architectural school, or whatever else you go through, lacks the ability to untap that particular thing. And so, the many ways in which we're looking at the structure. You can have the short-term incentive structures, and some of these marketing techniques sound to me more like that. But you know that they're only hooks that are used to push you to the next level of engagement, namely the intrinsic engagement, as I call it. So basically, this is where you wake up in the morning and you start to think, oh, I think I have a new idea. I have a new way of thinking of that thing that I was thinking about yesterday. So it starts becoming part of you. And you do it because you want it, not because you're going to get the next badge or because anything that's particularly short-lived. So the whole design process for us is how to have most number of people come into the door, and the greatest number of those people become the sort of constructive, enhancing part of the entire collective intelligence that we're trying to create. And the way that we do this, as I mentioned, we every day is a new experiment. So basically, the game looks different every 2 days, slightly tweaked in some way, and we basically
who writes that? Is that you, or who? How do you? What's your team structure?
There's basically, I mean, every one of those projects is maybe 2 to 5 people working actively on using the analytics of the previous 2 days, which could be 1,000 people. Completely new, just coming in, and then you're seeing how many of them are now on the grander challenges. Now, how many of them have gone through the process that's designed to regurgitate the entire biochemistry books in sort of interactive concept, only for the point of them being able to solve these larger, more complex problems. So we see how many more did we get with this experiment compared to the 2-day earlier experiment. And so basically, over time, We have created a community of maybe 500,000 people. Not all of them are experts, but they've self-organized themselves in these structures where you have people that are very good at one aspect of the problem, some people are very good at other aspects of the problem, and then they join in a team. For example, there's like a team where US guys work on it, they go to sleep, and then the Australians take over overnight, you know, and then when they're done, so they've self-organized simply over the globe to have continuous work on the actual problem that, for example, no scientific community does now. You know, they work in their own labs, and the only time that they share it was when they published a publication that all the other ones hear. Here, this stuff is accelerated by orders of magnitude. There's also people like, there's some grandmothers with high school education. They're not very good at solving these protein structures, but they're instrumental at actually being in these community social engagement chats and all these things that we have of helping people that are stuck initially to sort of resolve those problems that keep going. So they're really as glue for getting new people into the pipeline of creating these new experts. And no, we didn't design that for them. We just maximize the opportunities for these social refinement processes. And then people find their particular niche in there such a way that the entire objective that's, in this case, very directly measured, is improved over time.
I didn't realize that the size of the community was that gigantic. I mean, that's 500 million people, is what you're saying.
No, 500,000 million. Yeah.
Yeah,
half a million. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not all. So this is aggregate. You know, it was interesting. For example, another thing is some people that were very good a year ago. You know, they got a baby. They no longer play the game. The baby is now 8 months old. They want to come back and reclaim their status in the game, and they can't do it anymore. The reason is that the community itself has collectively advanced over the period of those 8 months to be at a much higher level of functionality and sophistication. So they were actually having a hard time reusing the skills that they themselves had developed and then stagnated to pick it up. So that was actually an eye-opening for me to see basically how dynamic this whole process of sort of emerging sort of the ability for everybody to get to the point of higher skill level.
So you have counselors that are on staff helping people reclaim their position?
No, it's not. I mean, unless I'm kidding, that would be too much of a more organized structure. But that's, I mean, so you know, I am an empiricist in that way, because when I started this project, you know, I was like, you know, there's no way we're going to get this right, and so I probably from the start. And you know, many hard design problems of any sort are like that too. You have to have some kind of scaffolding process to get you there. You're not going to have, being great idea, the whole problem solved. You know, in fact, if you look at any great creative solution out there, it's never the person who actually created the patent that ended up pushing it all the way through. It had almost every great invention that had to have been iterated by many people. So in some ways, what we're trying to do is do this accelerated process of iteration, where we don't use just one person's small group idea, but basically see how can this group or this collection of groups improve the potentially promising idea of this smaller group. And then how can you do that in a scope of days as opposed to months or years?
That's fantastic. I don't have any sense about how this is visually or dynamically organized. And that would be one thing that I think would be interesting. Yeah. Many of you probably know about the folded program, but it'd be interesting to learn how you organized that from
I'm
a
not
digital.
So sure. Probably have you heard of it? Yeah. Okay. A few of you.
2 people.
You
know, I know those two.
Yeah. I mean, it's. That's why. I mean, we still get like sort of we get 200 to 500 new people every day. So I'm wondering, like, there's, you know, where do people come from? There's a limited number of population, and so basically we're nowhere close to tapping out the number of population. So there's people still eventually keep hearing about it and getting introduced to the game. But it's and that's good, of course, because we can do these experiments consistently on fresh, unadulterated new minds that are just introduced, so we can see how much more. But of course, still the problem is such that you are still looking at the large population, and you're looking at some kind of Gaussian, where most people will be okay at a particular skill, and some people on the long tail will be very, very good at it, and maybe some people will be very not so great at it. But one thing that's interesting here is you don't assume it as a fixed entity. Okay, so it's something that we're measuring the propensity for them to become better, as opposed to just finding some people who just are savants and see everything right from the start. And so the question is then, for the calligraphy design, brand design, how many of the brand designs can be done more effectively by 10,000 different groups out there that perhaps you as a curator or a collection of people as a curator could just select and say, okay, the next evolution of refinement comes from those particular populations, and that's the next step. Or architectural design. I mean, is it really the case that architects have the monopoly on the creative design of spaces? Maybe architectural schools would like to think that, but reality probably is not so. And a lot of times when you look at sort of the novice designs, they're like, they don't follow some particular principles that they're sort of established in the art. But the question is, how many of those constraints, principles can be taught or evolved or learned? Probably all of them, right? So what is the structure that enables huge amount of creativity to sort of provide new designs of architectural spaces or brand and everything else? And that to me, that's how I think when I think about the kinds of problems you're trying to solve. And my feeling is, if you're looking for something optimal or very well researched, you want to get the most number of people collectively thinking about it, as opposed to I'll pick this architect and he will design my $300,000 remodeling project. Right?
I think that may be a good item for discussion as we move towards the end, that idea of a larger design collective or large thinking collective and how that content can be managed. Being a person that's run a design firm for a long time and watched iterations, and also someone who has collaborated with architects and seen large-scale pitches. I mean, I was just back meeting with a team of people at a firm called Big. How many people know about Big? It's 2 people? Wow. Okay. Well, it's Björk Ingels, the designer, Danish, I believe, is that right? Or Dutch designer, who, as I learned in meeting with him, his whole strategy is to work on global competitions. That's his focus, which is, as many of you know, design competitions are the bane of architectural world. I mean, to be persistently dealing with, constantly pitching projects where the best in the region or best in a city or the best in the world are converging on a prize. The prize may be no money, it may be winning the work and then being paid to do that. And this is becoming a very common model in China, for example, where instead of hiring an architecture firm, they'll just say, we're going to do this project, so let's do a pitch. I guess the thing that I'm curious about is the model, the bridge between that kind of ongoing profusion of looking at these challenges, because these are as many of you know. How many people are architects here, or designers involved with space? Okay, so most of the people are there. But that challenge of looking at a space, an expanse, and then how do you create a place out of it? How do you design an environment or an experience or a procession or a sequence in which people's lives can be positively influenced or their work can be more efficient, whatever the nature of that story might be. And but the thing I think is interesting about the model that you're considering is how could you converge a mass amount of minds on that? And I think that one of the things for me that I find in the work that we do is that the what we call the crowd mind is the only way to succeed. You can never do it by yourself. You need to have many different minds looking at the problem at the same time. Even if you're inside Procter or inside Johnson & Johnson or inside some of these big companies, you can't presume that your small little team alone is going to make it happen. You need to be able to reach out and to share that problem, which is in a way what you're doing in a gigantic way.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, sir, the last 2 months, 3 pharmaceutical companies have contacted us because they, I guess for the purpose of seeing how they're realizing that, to keep their edge on the next new drug, they want to tap into this new pathway of discovery. Now, of course, all our players would just have a sort of unilateral mutiny if we ended up doing this stuff with pharma, because they would just all say we completely sold out. So, so several things that I'd like to mention on this stuff. Competitions in general, they work for maybe the consumer, but they don't actually, almost always, if you have a consistent number of these competitions, the specific set of people end up winning. A, because they know how to play the game, and B, perhaps they're simply good, right? But that's not necessarily beneficial for the overall production model. So Odesk, do any of you know what Odesk is? It's basically a crowdsourcing company that sort of people can bid on a particular set of jobs and do them. You can issue competitions and stuff. So they
what kind of jobs?
It's everything from sort of web design, web page
design, mostly
to programming
digital.
It's almost all digital. But the problem is that for most of the bids, the really good people get them because they're already measured as being really good. But what they realize now is that saturates their growth of the community as well, right? So what they're trying to do is actually, it's more beneficial for them to give jobs to people who won't necessarily do as good of a job, because over time it would develop their expertise and they would have a larger population of people who were exposed to those particular problems. And so actually they're willing to take a loss on some of these bids that they're having in the long-term benefit for creating greater things. And so they're starting to get more aligned with this sort of, it's not just competition. How do you make a social, collaborative environment where people become better, not just constantly at each other's throat about competing? And so you're looking at the evolution as opposed to what's the status quo, right? And who is the best now? So I think that is the fundamental difference. If you start thinking of it that way, then you can develop expertise in arbitrary areas and so we're now actually going in the creative design space, specifically in nanotechnology. So basically, how do you build little machines from molecules that can sort of walk around your cell, identify cells that are cancerous, and sort of self-destruct only those and not others, right? It turns out it's a little tinker toy problem. You design little machines. They actually are walking along scaffoldings of the cell, and nature has made some of those machines, but synthetic biology now has the ability to make other ones that have not evolved in a particular way. And the immense space of creativity there is completely open. There's only 50 people in the world capable of doing this. So I'm really excited about actually opening it up to maybe 2 orders of magnitude increase of potential people. And I think even middle schoolers, with their creativity, might be able to do this. So the jury is out. We'll see how much we'll be able to do there. But
this is a exploratory that's based on your directive, or it's coming from a pharmaceutical request?
It's coming from a number of researchers who are trying to solve specific problems of what different molecules are capable of doing in the cell. So they're posing these problems. Nobody knows how to solve them. They have 2 postdocs in the lab trying to do it. We have 20,000, and so then the question is, are these postdocs going to explore the space faster than these novices who over time are going to be better and better at it? And you know who I'm going to bet on. But well, it's interesting. First time we had these papers out, we said we put our names on there, and we added like N75,000 folded players. That's the first paper that we had, right? And the board of this publication removed those names off the list, and I was like, I sent this like angry mail.
Remove the folded names?
As they accepted the paper, and then the editors are sort of fitting it into their journal, right? And they removed because it's not real name, it's 75,000. We weren't going to list them, so we just put it in there. And so basically we said, we're withdrawing the paper if you don't put this, because this is against the whole structure of this whole project. Mm-hmm. And the board had to meet, and they all together decided to elementally accept it. The second time around, it was clear that only 4 people directly contributed to the group of 4 people. And we asked them, do you want your names on the papers, or do you want your group name? They're called the contenders. That was their name. And all of them, without even thinking, say, well, we want the name of the group. We don't want to put, and contenders actually is maybe 75 people, but it's only, through analytics, we know that only 4 of those contributed, right? They said, we want the contenders. And I was thinking, how pure that incentive structure really is, because I can't do that. I wouldn't get any funding for my research if I just wrote University of Washington, on all of my papers. it just doesn't, academia doesn't work that way. Like, any kind of place where you need to sort of build a name for yourself, it just doesn't work that way. But these people are incentivized with a completely different structure, and for them it works. They want to uncover this protein, find that new drug, and that's their drive. It's not about their particular name. And I think that's also interesting, because to me, that was perhaps the most fulfilling thing ever, because it means that our incentive structure towards this intrinsic stuff really, really worked. And so there are people out there that just breed this thing simply because it's part of their life, and they just really like doing it. And in many ways, they're pure scientists than I am, in many ways. I had to play the game. I had to play this game that academia makes you play. They're playing this other game only because they want to, completely for free. So the interesting thing about this is that you cannot make this decision unilaterally anymore. So we have this like massive chat sessions with the entire population, right? Where at different time zones, I had to wake up at 2 in the morning to have some of them. Where we basically collect their feedback on what we should do. So the idea is, they realize that there's no way any drug will ever be made until a company decides that they're going to take this, they're going to make money from it, but they're going to take this design, right? So there's no way that we can just preclude any company from taking benefits from this. But what we can do is we have basically the structure in which this whoever pharma takes it sort of mandates it in such a way that will sort of benefit the population. So they should make profit, but not the ridiculous amount of profit that they make. And basically what pharmas do is they do research for 10 years, and then they try to build that up in the price of the drug to pay off for 10 years in the first 3 years of the drug release. I mean, so they're just order of magnitude 10 times more expensive than it needs to be, or more, right? So this, of course, changes that, because they didn't spend time on this research. These people produced it. So as a result, it should be a different.
So do you have a legal structure now that can?
Yeah. So we're basically. So what players are saying: what if a pharma is spying on what we're doing, and then taking our best solutions before, and then sort of doing it in-house. So we basically had to create sort of legal structure that prevents all of those things. And we're actually, university lawyers are still working on structuring some of this. Yeah, but it is, you know, that's what it is. It's pushing everywhere where we've gone. Everybody's uncomfortable, and sort of because it's just not the standard way that that structures or discoveries have been done. And but people are adjusting quickly because they, you know, initially when we had this, people were saying, "Oh, what a crazy idea!" You know, but we spend our livelihood in this biochemistry. How are people from the street going to be able to match that? Now, you know, like you get phone call every other week with some other crazy idea in science or government. We were talking about like eradicating corruption with one recently. So, you know, all of a sudden everybody's sort of saying, "Wow, this is a new pathway to sort of problem solving in general. How can we apply it to my pet problem?" Right? And the answer is probably not very easily. You know, this took 3.5 years of that iteration process that I just mentioned. You know, so I didn't assume any design insight or I didn't trust anything that me and my designers would do. All I trusted is those new people and how they were doing 5 days later on these particular challenges.
You said that you would iterate the algorithms to change the game every couple of
Yeah.
days. How did you do that iteration? Was it a sort of a computer-generated random?
In this case, it was manual. So basically, we had analysts every day looking at the data, saying this is the likely problem, and then the developers would work on it. So probably it would take a week before that particular intervention made its place, and they're staggered. So then you have every 2 days you have a new thing, but now we're doing it automatically. So now we're trying to do the entire K-12 education through this process in math. So the question is, can we adapt the experience for every unique kid such that they don't think math sucks by the end of middle school, which is what happens all the time now. But they basically, uniquely to them, think that they're good at it, and the more they apply themselves to it, the better they will become. And so that's an emotion. That's a self-identification or affect of how they think about it. That's one of the biggest problems in math. It's not about whether they can compute. It's what they think of themselves and the discipline that sort of prevents kids by middle school. I mean, there are studies out there that sort of 95% of kids by middle school do not want to do anything about math and science. And so the question is, can we change that? And so Gates Foundation gave us a fairly large amount of funds to actually try to see whether we can do that.
So you're competing with Khan Academy?
In some way, you can think of that. But, you know, we would both be sort of a nonprofit, you know, to the extent that nonprofits can compete. But, yeah, I mean.
Well, intellectually competing with methods and ideas.
I believe that interaction and growing your knowledge through actually putting your hands into something and moving around and understanding is how you'd learn. And they believe more in watching the video. My data shows that kids glaze over watching somebody doing something on Blackboard after 2.5 minutes, roughly speaking. But I claim that both will have a very strong place in the space of this new way of doing these things. I don't know if they consider incentive structures as much, but we're all about that. Because you want that kid to wake up and say, I want to go to the next level of this. It's not like the teacher tells you this is your homework. It's not like the parent cracks the whip or anything like that. And so to me, you know, I'm actually fascinated by the stuff that computers have the hardest thing to do, ability to do, which is this creative exploration in the space of all ideas towards a particular solution that has some loose constraints, but otherwise is widely open, right? And that's what that's what you and firms that like yours are doing very effectively. And, you know, oftentimes one marvels at what people who have done on this for a very long time can do. But at the same time, I've always wondered, like, how can how can we sort of enable everybody to feel that empowered? How can everybody feel like I can come up with some ideas myself, or I can be a useful part of the infrastructure that eventually produces something really amazing. You know, I may not do everything myself, but
people ever meet each other face to face?
they're starting to somewhere. Yeah. Sometimes I've flown them to Seattle to just because I was filming them to see actually what exactly were they doing that made them so good.
For the purposes of
When I first began working in the 70s, I oftentimes was involved with different kinds of projects as a designer or as an illustrator or as a draftsman or as a whatever I may have been. And I'd never even meet the people that I dealt with. I would talk to them on the phone and I'd learn about what they were trying to do, and then I would send them a proposal, and then I would go do it if they wanted me to be involved. But what I found over the last maybe 5 years is that my ability to be able to listen to people is greatly enhanced by actually being connected to them. So if I can see someone and I can hear their story and I can get a character about the vibe of who they are, what the challenge is, or what is the culture that I'm dealing with, then I have a better chance of surviving and succeeding than if I am trying to do that remotely. And I can tell you right now, I've got 2 things that are happening now that where I'm working on a problem where I know I could solve the problem immediately if I could actually be in front of that person. Because the ability to be able to connect with them and draw or talk or look at things and define character is much more facile when you are live with somebody and you can see them.
Yeah.
You can see what's going on, and they can see you, and they can either believe you or say, this guy's full of shit. Get him out of here. Which, that's happened.
I have actually a follow-up question. So, I mean, there's no question that that happens. And in fact, a lot of times we're trying to mitigate the clear weakness of sort of these telepresence things that sort of lacks this thing. But at the same time, I've realized that communication at a particular point in time is harmful to uniqueness of the ideas that are generated. So I wanted to ask you, so oftentimes you get people in the room, they'll either fight it or they will very quickly, too quickly reach the consensus, in which case you wouldn't have necessarily explored all the possible things that if you allow them to communicate after they have really been forced to just push the boundaries first. So what is your thought on that?
It's an interesting, because one of the, Deborah had asked what are the 3 things that I thought about. One of them was nature, one of them is share, and the other is fight. Those are the 3 sort of theories for me on that. And I think that oftentimes live sparring with someone is much more kind of electrical in terms of the evolution of the idea than remote work. I find that working in a situation where I'm looking at a problem, I'm looking at a person and the problem, I feel like I have a much better chance of perceiving how to get through that if there's that live connection. And it may be a fight. I mean, I think, how many times have you been in a challenge, a scenario, a solution, trying to find a solution or trying to move to another level with how someone thinks about something, and it's really a fight. It's not like a sharing, it's not like nice. It's kind of like, you will get popped. And maybe you're going to see maybe you're going to see better because of that, or maybe it'll be deflating or demoralizing or disconnecting. But that idea of sort of circling a problem and then looking for how you're going to strike at it, oftentimes I think is profoundly intimate, but also electrical in terms of the change. And one thing that I have dealt with, which I'd be curious about whether you obviously you reference this a little bit, is a mass fight, brawl. When you have a lot of people involved, and then you start getting these brawling factions going. Well, how do you deal with that?
Well, there's a group competition, so that kind of all those things come into, they all organize and they want to be. But because it's group, there's also a huge amount of collaboration. There's also, we created something that we call recipes. So they're basically small little scripts or common patterns that people use that they're able to share with each other or hide from the competitors. And we found that with those, people became better a lot faster and stuff. So basically, we continuously try to have more social elements in the game, because the engagement, and probably why it works directly one-on-one also, is that people are just directly engaged. They zero in on each other, know exactly. Some of these loose constraints and now become more crystallized when you hear the person actually talk about it. So in the same way, we constantly try to add more and more social elements, and every time we do that, there's a longer retention of people because they're more engaged. The fights are oftentimes, there's 500,000 people, so you get all kinds of things in real life, people fighting, it's all in there too, right? And so the question is, you just step away at some point. It's like, well, I don't want to deal with that. This will just blow after. But there are mutinies, people leaving one group into another. There are people stealing, trying to cheat, reporting people who are cheating, people creating multiple accounts, so that they're actually doing different things. So all sorts of things you can imagine are happening, are replicating themselves in this sort of virtual structure as well. And so if there's one thing that I could actually try to augment it with, it's that sort of personal interaction in the same room, that really is missing. But possibly, technology is sort of slowly shaving at that as well. I mean, it's, with these personal conversations, when you see people, it's still different than just on the phone or sending some angry email, which a lot of people have done in the past. Yeah, so I thought about it a lot. Even when we were talking about math, but now we're talking about literacy and ability to actually do creative thinking, creative writing. And the question is, well, how do you know something's good? A computer's going to have a terrible time actually reading something and deciding that. However, there are actually very effective ways to do this, also by utilizing people's opinion, right? So imagine how many grandmothers out there would be willing to sort of have fun reading kids' papers all over it and getting credit for actually being able to sort of contribute something to the overall improvement of the young generation in being creative writers, right? So the question is that, so then my answer is use people as a metric of some of these less definable things, right? So you can ask 200 people. They will give you maybe even like Likert scale kind of grading on 5 different dimensions. From that, you can start to say, okay, nobody's right here, but I can see the trends. I can see how this compares to something else, and that's the main thing that you want. You want to say, is this better for random 200 people than this? Well, if you just average all of those dimensions, yeah, that's probably not a good idea. But if you look at sort of everything from multiple axes, you're going to basically see, here's, and you wouldn't look at just averages. You would say, here's what the X people that are highly rated as experts think, and here's what the general population thinks. So you can actually have a nuanced assessment based on how you've pre-rated the community that's actually giving those ratings. So, it's a lot harder, The other problem is that it's not immediate. That kind of feedback is not immediate, and that's very important for this kind of iterations where people learn from, they move something, they see what happens, and they get feedback right away. That's how people learn. If that's delayed, if you have to wait 2 days before you get the actual scale of how well you've done, that's a big challenge. People don't like that so much. So yeah, but that's why I'm not tackling those problems just yet. That will take some time.
Well, what I have observed in my own work is that what I think is finite is never finite. I think that I've come up with a good solution, a solid approach to an array of challenges. Because oftentimes when I'm working on something, perhaps like you, I'm looking at this, but I'm also looking at this and this and this and this. And how do I collectively organize that and create something, some answer that will help with the solution, the flow through of that in a holistic way. And but what I invariably find is that based on the influence of humanity and the sort of shifting tapestry of how people are, you can create something, and then by doing that creative work, the culture changes because of what you've done. And then suddenly where you were actually is not really right because the whole culture has changed because of the work that you did. So then it has to evolve and kind of continue to shift and slide. And that's why I think that idea, the metaphor of solution and solution finding, the answer, the solving, and that idea of flow to the solution is really kind of an interesting metaphor because it is about that idea of how does the answer continue to be answered? How do you start with one answer here and then that answer continues, which actually comes back to one of your opening remarks, which is, okay, you do something great, so now it's 6 months later, what's the point? Do people care about it? Does it mean anything? I think in my work, I oftentimes find myself trying to get to people to say, hey, how is it? How are you? How is it working? How's it going? What's happened? And that's the method that I use, which is rather fundamental, but it works. You can find out how it's working.
Yeah, I mean, I think the process is way too complex. I mean, sort of the human mind is complex. Human mind in the environment that's affected by is even more complex, right? So I wouldn't claim that I have actually even particularly strong predictive powers or any of that. I am actually looking at ways in which people can be sort of classified in large trends in such a way that you can predict how you can maybe present material in a different way such that it fits better the progression of some set of people than others.
Move them in a direction you want.
Yeah, but only in sort of more global scale, I think. And one thing we're finding is you think everybody is so individual and everybody learns math in a completely unique way. Turns out when you actually look at the data, it's not the case. There's like for every concept you can basically find largely 3 or 4 or 5 different things. I bet you in the design process, people, I mean even, do you know the trees, this Russian process of creative creation? It's called trees. It's this, basically they identify the set of mechanisms that when combined together lead to creative findings, right? So one is like reduction, one is recombination of other things, so there's like 30 some. And so they're structured, and initially I was like, oh, these Russians, they would quantify everything, right? But then later on, when I look at sort of different processes, even sort of this creative tinker toy creation, you see that there are common trends they can be quantified on two hands, basically. So there are some common ways in which there are many different ways in which we explored, but they're small, but those exploration strategies are very broad, and that's what gives us. So even two people in the same strategic group could be having completely different solutions simply because they explore with the same strategy in a different way. And that's the value of this diversified idea exploration. So yeah, I think in about 5 years we will have more structures and principles. Right now we have one or two exemplars of something that really, really worked, and everybody's scratching their head saying, what in the world just happened here? Sometimes scientists do that. So basically the players just love having puzzles that last for a week. Scientists look at the results, they report on what's good. Maybe something went to the lab, something didn't, and then the next puzzle comes up. So this whole iterative process, scientists themselves learn how to pose problems in this new structure. So that kind of guidance happens naturally through that pathway. I think that one thing is diversification of the original solutions. One thing, for example, that we found is the more social elements you give, the quicker people will say, oh yeah, this is clearly the right solution. And they all en masse go there. And I think that a lot of times that happens too soon. So now we're changing the structure completely. They don't let them share stuff initially until and then basically we identify the most diverse solutions produced there, and then we turn on the socialization with these pillars as the potential exploration point. So we're basically trying to see how to not lose the creative independent exploration at the same time as use the power of collective sort of intelligence in the process of refinement of those subsequent things. So we're changing the structure that way. And in many ways, yeah, we try to also change the scoring function, right, to have people do stuff that's useful rather than stuff that just gets more points for no particular reason. So yeah, there is a lot of engineering there. A lot of them it has to be transparent because people don't like changing the rules midway through. You get big, angry statements. All the time. Fortunately for us, our goal is altruistic. So basically, it's not. I mean, if
You're not manipulating.
yeah, I mean we are manipulating it, but for the purpose of better good.
Yeah.
If that's removed, I don't actually know how that would work. I think it would be a lot harder. You have to start injecting money and other things, basically.